Hey, welcome back. We're behind the label, and this is part 4 of the pepper series. I'm Lowell. I'm from Elgrave Photography.
I'm Jerry of Stone Fence Tours.
And
we're sitting in front of the beautiful distiller's house of Silver Springs Distillery.
Now, when he says the distiller's house, he means the original
1880s
yeah, this was built in the 1880s on Silver Springs
Distillery.
Distillery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's Silver Springs Farm now, but soon again to be Silver Springs Distillery.
Yes, we're going to be a craft distillery here. It's actually already, they call it equine.
Yeah, I think it's a cute name, yeah.
Yeah, so there's actually a vineyard here, and there's thoroughbreds here, so it's a great place to come out. B&B behind us, the distiller's house is B&B now. So it's a great place to come, and I mean, it's beautiful to hang out and, you know, stay and do your bourbon tours.
Yeah, and
you can do them with us if you want.
Right.
I mean, you know, Stone Fence Tours, you can do them with us.
And you're getting to be part of history because you're literally setting, in the series that we're talking about, you're setting in the location.
And we're actually adding this site to our Peppers Distillery tour.
Yeah, cool.
We are. It's going to be the last site. And
it makes sense. Well, it makes sense chronologically.
It does, chronologically.
And the reason that makes sense, so let's jump back into our story. If you've been watching along, we left off with third generation Pepper, who is James.
James Pepper.
Actually known as Colonel Pepper.
Yeah.
But
honorary.
As we've talked about before, which I'm really pushing for Jerry and I to become Kentucky Colonel so we can put behind the label with Colonel Daniels.
Yes, that'd be awesome.
So Colonel was honorary title, Kentucky Colonel, same way with Colonel Taylor. So there was a lot of the use of Colonel, I've noticed, and the use of old, because I think they sort of tied that into this is quality. If it's old pepper, it's aged. Yeah.
Yes.
So when we left off, James had just acquired a brand new distillery, or at least a site of the distillery.
Yes, the old Henry Clay Distillery.
Yeah,
yes,
on what is Manchester Street now in Lexington. It was the site of the old Henry Clay Distillery.
Yes, so we're talking about 1879 at the time. And he built a new distillery there. It didn't last long because as most distilleries about that time, it burned down. So a lot of them did that, and it was rebuilt.
You say that a little facetiously. You mean you think he burned it down?
No, it burned down. It burned down again a little bit later.
It wasn't an insurance job.
No, it burned down a little bit later. So he built this distillery in Lexington. This is a large distillery. Produces a lot of bourbon. One of the biggest ones in the state. So, and he's a man, like I said, that travels the country.
And the world, yeah.
The world. I mean, he's promoting his bourbon. It's, you know, we'll throw some pictures up where it was at like heavyweight fights. It was the bourbon that was advertised at these heavyweight fights.
I read some stories about he's savvy. He would, for instance, in Manhattan, he would go into the most exclusive restaurants he could find. He would bribe the waiters to set empty bottles
of his product
on the tables to look as if the patrons that had just left just finished a bottle of his delicious whiskey.
He was a businessman, yes,
so
he was.
The next people that came along say, hey, what's that? I want some of that. Apparently whoever sat here before really enjoyed that. So he was a marketing genius. He was a self-promoter. He made sure that he was associated with the elite, and that by association then gave him credentials and promoted his whiskey. So he
did.
To do that.
Promoted his whiskey, but there was another industry in Kentucky that he was very big into also.
And honestly, probably at that time he may have even been as well known in that industry as the whiskey industry.
Yeah. So if you think of Kentucky, if you think of bourbon, what's the other industry you think of?
Methamphetamine.
No, we're talking late 1800s. Horses. He actually, him and his wife, Ella, who come from a horse family, horse family. Actually,
Ella Skeen, I think was her name.
Yeah, Ella Keene. Yeah, and they purchased a Meadowthorpe stable. Had a lot of great. They did well. You know, in thoroughbred racing, they did.
Yeah,
very
they had. I know they had 2 contenders in the Kentucky Derby. They won. I think they came in second one year. They won the Oaks one year.
Yeah.
He had a lot of studs and brood mares that were world famous.
He did.
All right. What is Colonel James Pepper's favorite horse? What was its name?
Prince Pepper?
Prince Pepper.
Prince Pepper, yeah.
It's the only thing that after he died that his wife kept.
It is. So, I mean, they had Meadowthorpe Staple. They actually bought another land adjacent to that, another farm. Meadowthorpe stud.
Yep.
So, I mean, they were huge in the horse racing. And so, I mean, you think of Kentucky, you think horse racing bourbon, they were in it.
Right.
That actually is called Meadowthorpe subdivision now.
Yeah.
And it was actually the home to Lexington's first airport.
Yes. And who's the most famous person ever landed at that
Charles
airport?
Lindbergh.
1921.
That's right. Charles Lindbergh landed there, and he said it was too short.
Yeah, and it was a secret. He didn't want anybody to know about it. He actually landed. No one knew about it, but word got out that Charles Lindbergh landed at I think it was called Halsey's Field or
something like that. Yes.
Haley's Field maybe.
Haley's Field. Yeah.
So word got out that Charles Lindbergh had landed at this tiny little. It literally, when I say tiny airport, it literally was a grass field.
He said it was way too short.
That was surrounded with fence and telephone poles.
Yeah, but it was Lexington's first
But it was
airport.
Lexington's first airport,
It was.
and it was opened. Do you know who opened the airport?
No, who?
Kentucky's only World War I ace. I will have to look up his name, but I know that for sure. He was the only World War I ace from Kentucky, and he opened it, and he bought a plane from England, and it held 3 passengers.
Was it Haley?
No, it wasn't Haley.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, it was James O. something. I can't remember his last name, so I don't want to misquote him. But he had a 3-passenger plane. It was called the Daniel Boone was the name of the plane.
Oh.
So
That's Kentucky.
Yeah, so it's Kentucky. So this pilot would basically fly out of this airport. They apparently did they were wanting to start an airport at Mount Sterling, which if you've been to Mount Sterling, they have a tiny little airport there.
They do.
They were wanting to, that's when that got started. So they invited him to fly to this field basically. They had built this barn to house these airplanes. They parked them all too close. When he got in to start his plane up, some of the fuel from one of the adjacent planes was on his plane. His plane backfires, burns the whole place down, burns down all the planes, including the Daniel Boone plane, and up. All right, so we've been talking about James Pepper. He owned Meadowthorpe Farm. Like we said, we kind of did digress there. How it became sort of Lexington's first airport. And Charles Lindbergh was involved. So let's get back to James Pepper. At this point, he is the owner now of the distillery on Manchester Street.
Yes.
And it's called?
James E. Pepper Distillery.
Originally it was called?
Oh, Henry Clay Distillery, yes.
Henry Clay Distillery. So, but then he changed the name.
Yeah, the James E. Pepper
to
Distillery.
the James E. Pepper.
Yeah.
So now, is that an intentional play? Is he trying? I'm assuming he is, because if it were me, that's what I would do. The Pepper name is already established in the world of bourbon.
Old Oscar Pepper was one of the best bourbons out there in the 1800s. So.
Yeah.
So he carries on that family line. I mean, the bourbon was advertised everywhere, out in the West. So you're talking about towns like Deadwood and all that. You see that. There were like prize fights, heavyweight prize fights, where they sponsored it. So he was very big into sponsoring events, getting the name out there.
He was sort of the Dana White of bourbon.
Oh, he was. He was a great marketer. So right now we're actually enjoying some James E. Pepper bourbon. The 1776, like I said, they trace their roots back to the Revolutionary War. So
yeah, he like I said, they kind of claim that it says "Born with the Republic" on the back.
Yes.
So that's kind of where they're getting the 1776. It even says on the label, established in 1780 during the American Revolution's Pepper family brand is the oldest brand of whiskey made in Kentucky. So I know that was his claim.
It was.
Because I know even when he went to Manhattan, when he kind of hung out with the other barons of the time, he really pushed that. In fact, there's a drink that he didn't invent, but he made famous.
The old fashioned.
Exactly, the old fashioned. I'm sure everyone's heard of an old fashioned. So the old fashioned was originally made by, I never have seen the bartender's name, but apparently there was a bartender in Louisville that used Old Pepper whiskey, or Old Oscar Pepper whiskey, I should say, to make a drink that was called the old fashioned.
Yeah.
James Pepper got hold of this idea and really promoted it. He saw it as kind of a way to really push that as not only his whiskey, but as a signature cocktail. So when he was in Manhattan, he would have people, I read another story where he would pay people off to go up to the bar and say things like, "Hey, give me another Manhattan. That's the best drink I've ever had in my life."
He was great at marketing.
Oh,
yes,
he was great. And he sort of did subversive marketing, which is great, because he would have people think, "Oh, wow, what did that guy just say?" And then the bartender would be in on it, and he'd say, "Oh, that guy, yeah, everybody's drinking these Manhattans. They love it. They can't get enough of it. We're almost ready to run out of whiskey. You better order one now because we don't have much left."
Was it James E. Pepper bourbon?
It was James Pepper bourbon.
Yes. So what we're drinking now is actually James E. Pepper straight bourbon. This is you talk about a high rye content. This is actually 57% corn. We're used to 70-some%.
Oh yeah.
39% rye.
Oh, so really high rye. Yeah.
Really high rye. 4%.
Now, what's the corn amount?
57.
57.
Yeah,
okay.
we're usually used to 70, 75 in that range. So very high rye bourbon.
It's odd that with that high of a rye, I'm still getting more rye out of the original that we tried, and it's only how much? What's the mash bill on this one?
That one they haven't released on what it is.
Okay.
Yes, but it is a 4-year 110 proof.
Okay, so that may be why. So maybe it is a real high rye. Okay.
Whereas this is 100 proof right here.
Okay.
So this is what they have out now. They have a bourbon, they have a rye.
Yeah, it's not bad.
But it's not as spicy as this one.
Yeah,
not near as spicy.
It doesn't have the pepper bite as much.
Yeah. So this one is only a 3-year, 100 proof. So, but yeah, that's odd with that 57% corn, 39% rye. That's a very high. I mean, so back to James.
Yeah. So James is in his heyday.
He's in his heyday.
So
he actually is a big sponsor of the Bottle and Bond Act.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So him and Colonel Taylor kind of worked with that.
Yep.
Now
he was big big anti-whiskey trust, from what I understand.
Oh, he was, yes.
So he didn't like the whiskey trust idea.
No, he did not. I mean, he was all about the purity of bourbon. So he was behind the Bottle and Bond Act, the Food and Drug Act in 1906.
Now, one cool thing, here's one of these stumper things I'm gonna try. Give me one thing that James Pepper invented that was later adopted in the Bond and Bottle Act.
Invented? You stumped me already.
This, you see this little stamp?
Yep.
It's called the signature stamp.
Okay.
That was invented by James Pepper. So he basically invented this little, essentially a sticker that goes over the top of the stopper. It had his signature on it, and in the ads it would say, if you buy a bottle of my whiskey and if there's tampering evident in the label or in the
so if it's torn like this,
if it's torn like that,
yeah,
you probably want to second guess drinking that whiskey because it's probably not my whiskey.
Okay.
So he basically, by doing that, gave this illusion that you're buying the genuine thing, you're buying premium. This is pure. This is straight from the factory, as opposed to hell, this could be anything.
It's the best.
It's the best.
The best, kind of like Colonel Taylor.
Yeah. So it was both an assurity of quality from a manufacturing standpoint, but even more so, it was a marketing ploy. It's like if you see a Lexus badge on a car, you're like, oh, that's a nice car. It basically serves the same thing. So later on, the people that were responsible basically for passing the Bond and Bottle Act said, oh, that's a great idea. So they adopted it, and it became standard as part of that.
Okay. Yeah, he was ahead of his time, just like Colonel Taylor.
Yeah.
He definitely was. But we talked about 56 was a number with the Pepper family. So what happened in 1906? At his prime. In his prime. James E. Pepper's prime. What happened?
So James Pepper, as he said, has basically used to travel the world, travel to Europe. He would get inspirations from castles. In fact, he wanted to build a castle. He was in Manhattan, as I understand, with his wife for Christmas.
Close to the Waldorf. He was staying at the Waldorf.
They kind of stayed with the Waldorf Astoria. Always kind of kept coming with the big wigs. Was on an icy sidewalk. He slips, he falls, and he breaks his leg.
And actually, James dies a few days later.
He died.
Dies a few days later after breaking his leg.
From breaking his leg.
Now, you're a big, chemist, scientist. So what's your theory? They never gave a reason for passing away, but what's your theory?
It's unknown. When you break a long bone, there's a lot of marrow in the long bone. Normally that's not exposed to your blood system. Fat and basically precursor cells to your blood cells get in the bloodstream. Your immune system sees it as foreign. It attacks it, causes a clot. That clot then goes typically to your lung. It's called a pulmonary embolism. Basically, it's almost like having a stroke in your lung. It's the best way to think of it. It basically cuts off part of the circulation to your lung. There's another name for it, fat embolism syndrome, FES. You might see that sometimes. There's actually been cases of completely healthy, for instance, 30-year-old aerobics instructors that have a fracture in their ankle or in their foot that end up dying from the same thing. Because you imagine, doing aerobics, you fracture your foot, or playing basketball, and 3 days later you're dead because you have an embolism to your lung. So basically, that's what I think happened to him, because Had it been an infection, it would have probably taken longer.
Taken a while.
Taken a little while longer. And plus you would have seen things like amputation and that sort of thing happening before. But all they say is he fell, he broke his leg, 3 days later he dies.
So him and his father, Oscar, lived to 56 years old.
56 years old. Yeah.
So he passes away. Now, he has no children.
Right.
So the distillery falls into investors' hands. So you're talking about before Prohibition.
Now, I read a little bit of an interesting story saying that his wife originally resisted it going basically to, she was wanting to take control of the company. But she basically got overruled, and she basically then became sort of money hungry because they said, hey, we'll pay you. They didn't really give a sum, but it was a large sum for the company. And she kind of got on this roll of where she sold the company,
she sold the company,
the house, the farm.
She sold her thoroughbreds.
She sold everything.
She kept one thoroughbred, Prince Pepper. Prince Pepper. She, like I said, she came from a horse family, but she kept the one thoroughbred. But she did well. She actually lived until 1939, so she outlived James for a long time.
So you're saying she broke his leg and killed him, is what you're saying?
She did pretty well. She did pretty well.
So you're saying it was Epstein didn't kill himself?
And they're both buried in the Lexington Cemetery.
Yes,
so
I did know that.
Yeah. So it it changes hands. It goes to the investors. It closes at Prohibition. Acts as a concentration warehouse.
Yeah. So they actually got to house bourbon during Prohibition for, as we've said before, medicinal purposes. They were one of the few places. I know there was, who else did it? And there were
6 that actually could make it. There were different medicinal ones, mostly in the larger cities.
But there were some that could house it. And
they could house it because there was a lot of theft going on out in some of these smaller cities. So they actually moved all the barrels to concentration warehouses. So they acted as a concentration warehouse during Prohibition. After Prohibition.
But now I also read that because they pulled their stocks down so far, that they were allowed to produce some, not at the Pepper Distillery. It was at the something to do with Willett. I can't remember.
Yeah, there were 6 different distilleries at first.
And so
nobody could make it at first, and then the stocks got so low. They're like, well, somebody's got to make it. So they had 6 different distilleries that could make it. They survived Prohibition. Actually, opened back up after Prohibition. And what happened in 1934?
The world opened up, and the coronavirus was dead.
No, that was this 2020.
That's now.
This 1934.
Prohibition was over.
Prohibition was over. The distillery burnt down.
Yeah. Mysteriously
burnt down in 1934. They rebuilt the distillery.
As an aside to that, so just to show James Pepper's acumen at business and marketing, he actually apparently kind of saw how the wind was blowing before Prohibition. There was a lot of temperance movements going on. So he kind of started saying, hey, I feel like this is going to be a problem for us. And so before he died, he actually started running ads in pharmacy trade journals. And so he actually got it promoted and legal in pharmacies so that it would be advertised in pharmacies as a medicinal drug.
That's why you can buy it at Walgreens and CVS today.
Exactly. And so starting in 1901, he started getting advertisements in pharmacies that it was medicinal, and it cured like arthritis, gout, consumption, which is now
everything.
Tuberculosis. Basically cured what ailed you. So he got basically the backing of the pharmaceutical industry. Then he got 40,000 physicians to sign on the petition saying that they recommend his whiskey over any other whiskey during Prohibition as medicinal whiskey. And he got him to sign a contract for 6 times the price. So he actually, his company, and he had already died by this time, of course. But they basically took his idea of, hey, this is another avenue for us. So they actually made money during Prohibition on whiskey at 6 times the price.
So we're at what, 1934? The distillery burns down. So if you want to find out what happens at the distillery, stay tuned.
Keep watching.
Open mind.